was tucked away in the back corner of the pawn shop, gathering dust under a dim, flickering light. The guitar was old but beautiful. Its polished mahogany body gleamed with a sinister warmth. Its strings seemed to hum faintly, as if waiting for someone to touch them. Mason wasn't even looking for a guitar that day, but the moment he saw it, he couldn't look away. "How much for that one?" he asked the shopkeeper, nodding toward it. The man's face darkened. "That guitar's not for sale," he said. "Everything's for sale," Mason said, pulling out his wallet. He loved music, and something about this guitar called to him. "How much?" The shopkeeper hesitated, then finally sighed. $50 and no returns. Don't say I didn't warn you." Mason laughed, thinking the guy was just trying to spook him into thinking it was worth more. But $50? A steal. He handed over the cash and walked out, the guitar in his hands. That night, he couldn't wait to try it. As soon as he got home, Mason sat in his tiny apartment, strumming a few chords. The sound was unlike anything he'd ever heard, rich, haunting, and strangely alive. The notes seemed to linger in the air, vibrating deep in his chest. He played for hours, losing track of time, his fingers moving across the strings as if guided by some unseen force. By the time he looked up, it was 3 a.m., and his fingertips were bleeding. The next day, Mason skipped work to play the guitar. He told himself it was just for an hour, but once he picked it up, he couldn't stop. His stomach growled, his phone buzzed endlessly with calls from his boss and friends, but he ignored it all. The music was all that mattered. By the third day, Mason hadn't eaten or slept. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his apartment was a mess. Plates of untouched food piled on the counter, clothes scattered everywhere. But he didn't care. The music had consumed him. It wasn't until the fourth night that the nightmares began. When Mason finally passed out with the guitar cradled in his arms, he dreamed of a shadowy figure watching him from the corner of his room. It held a guitar just like his, and when it began to play, the music was deafening, like screaming violins and thunder crashing in unison. Mason woke in a cold sweat, the sound still echoing in his ears. But the guitar was different now. Its strings glowed faintly, as if alive, and when Mason touched them, they burned his fingers. Still, he couldn't stop. The more he played, the more the guitar seemed to take from him, his strength, his sanity, his very essence. Yet the sound it produced was intoxicating, impossible to resist. Neighbors began to complain. They could hear the guitar's eerie, hypnotic melody at all hours, even through the thick walls. Some claimed the music gave them splitting headaches. Others said it brought vivid, violent nightmares. One tenant swore she saw shadows moving in her apartment when Mason played. A week later, Mason's best friend, Eric, stopped by to check on him. When no one answered the door, he let himself in. The apartment was pitch dark, save for the faint red glow coming from the guitar. Mason sat in the corner, hunched over it, his fingers raw and bloodied as he strummed the strings. "Mason, what the hell are you doing?" Eric demanded. Mason looked up, his face pale and sunken, his eyes bloodshot. "It won't let me stop," he whispered. "It needs me to play." Eric reached for the guitar, but Mason lunged at him, screaming. "Don't touch it!" he roared, his voice hoarse and unrecognizable. In the struggle, Eric managed to rip the guitar from Mason's hands. The moment his fingers touched the strings, he froze. A slow, eerie grin spread across Eric's face. "I get it now," he murmured, his voice distant, almost dreamy. He sat down and began to play, the haunting melody filling the room once again. Mason screamed and tried to take it back, but it was too late. The guitar had found a new victim. By the next morning, Eric was gone.